Every story has a moment that shatters the illusion, not with noise, but with a silence so sharp it cuts. For Valentina, that moment arrived through a simple text message, one line, 11 words, delivered without hesitation or remorse. Please don't come. The family wants a drama-free wedding. It didn't arrive with explanation, warmth, or hesitation. It didn't wobble, or apologize, or soften itself with emojis the way people do when they know they're doing something cruel. It came clean, efficient, almost rehearsed, and before she could even swallow that sting, a notification flickered right beneath it. Serena Redhart liked this message. That was it. A tap of a thumb. An endorsement. A confirmation. A quiet execution carried out in pixels. Valentina stared at the screen, not blinking, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. There was no scene, no scream, no explosion of emotion. Just a tightening inside her chest, the subtle, unforgettable snap of something that had been stretched too thin for too long. The kind of break that doesn't echo outward, but inward, right into the places a person hopes no one can reach. The message did not surprise her. And that somehow was the most painful part. It didn't feel like an unexpected betrayal, but like the final proof of something she had been trying not to believe for years. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't even impulsive. It was a culmination. A decision made long before the words appeared on her screen. Valentina had spent years serving as the reliable daughter, the steady sister, the woman who organized chaos, handled payments, solved problems, and stayed silent. She was the scaffolding beneath the glossy front her family displayed to the world. And scaffolding, she knew, wasn't supposed to be seen. It was only supposed to hold everything else up. But this message, this surgical little dismissal, made one truth undeniable. They didn't see her at all. Not as a sister. Not as a daughter. Not even as a participant. She was a function, not a person. Useful when needed, disposable when inconvenient, and in that moment, staring at her phone in the dim morning light of her apartment, she felt something inside her settle. Not a collapse, no, that would imply weakness. It was more like alignment. Awareness. A cold, still clarity that whispered, they never expected you to say no. They never thought you'd stop helping. They never imagined you'd choose yourself. Her fingers moved before her emotions caught up. She typed back 2 words, great choice, as calmly as if she were confirming a meeting time. No pleading. No guilt. No explanation. She put her phone down. She inhaled. Exhaled, and in that thin moment between breaths, she understood something her grandmother had been trying to teach her for years. Sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that rewrite your entire life. This was not the loud break her family expected. It was the quiet one. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that marks the beginning of everything that comes next. From the outside, Valentina's family looked picture-perfect, clean lines, coordinated holiday photos, shining smiles that suggested unity rather than imbalance. But anyone who has lived inside a family knows that appearances are cheap currency. The real story lives in the roles people are boxed into long before they have enough language to resist them. Valentina's role had been assigned to her before she even understood what a role was. She wasn't the golden child. That title belonged securely, irrevocably, to Serena, whose beauty and charm were treated like family heirlooms. She wasn't the adored one or the delicate one or the one who needed attention. No, Valentina was the reliable one. The child who didn't break things. The daughter who didn't complain. The sister who handled what others dropped. Her reliability wasn't praised, it was expected. And expectations, once set, rarely shrink. They multiplied. As a child, she was the one who remembered everyone's schedules without being asked. As a teenager, she filled out forms, fixed forgotten details, held emotional balance in a house where tension ran under the carpets. As an adult, she became the silent architect behind every family event. Not because she asked for the responsibility, but because the responsibility found her and stuck to her like a shadow. When her mother hosted gatherings, it was Valentina who arrived early to prepare and stayed late to clean up. When Serena forgot deadlines, appointments, payments, Valentina stepped in, smoothing out the chaos so no one had to face consequences. When her father drifted quietly through conflict, she became the de facto mediator, speaking the words he wouldn't and solving the issues he avoided. Her competence became the family's invisible infrastructure. Her presence became the adhesive no one acknowledged. Her sacrifices became routine, counted on, absorbed into the background. No one asked if she wanted these responsibilities. Want was irrelevant. She was capable, therefore she was used. It wasn't that her family lacked affection entirely. They loved her in a way that felt administrative. They appreciated the results she produced, not the person she was. Validation came not through warmth, but through silence. No complaints meant she had done her job well. Their gratitude was often implied, never spoken aloud, and always overshadowed by their assumption that she would simply continue doing more. Valentina didn't fight this identity because she didn't know she was allowed to. She grew up believing this was normal. Every family had a Serena, every household leaned on someone. She thought reliability was a compliment, when in truth, it was the cage they'd built around her. A golden one, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. She became the planner, the fixer, the payer, the responsible adult long before adulthood even reached her. And somewhere along the way, she internalized the belief that her worth depended on her usefulness. If she stopped supporting everyone else, would anyone still see her? So she kept performing, kept managing, kept absorbing the weight, kept playing the role written for her before she understood she could refuse the script. Until the day the uninvitation text arrived, and for the first time, she glimpsed how deeply they relied on the version of her that asked for nothing and gave everything. The role she never chose was starting to crack, and beneath it, something truer was waiting. Families often present themselves as mosaics, pieces arranged just so, colors balanced, smiles placed exactly where they'll be noticed. But mosaics don't reveal the cracks beneath the tiles. They don't show which pieces were polished and which were pressed into place by force. In Valentina's family, each person had a role, a rhythm, a personality that shaped the household like weather shapes a shoreline. And the contrast between them wasn't just noticeable, it was defining. Marissa, the mother, was the architect of appearances. Everything about her carried an intentional sharpness, from the tilt of her chin to the precise way she layered compliments and criticisms like cosmetics. She possessed the uncanny ability to smile warmly at guests while delivering quiet, slicing judgment beneath her breath. To the world, she was elegant, composed, socially graceful. But behind closed doors, grace transformed into control. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. Her disappointment was silent but devastating, like a room where the temperature drops a few degrees without explanation. She valued image above intimacy, perfection above connection. And Serena, naturally, became her masterpiece. If Marissa was the force, Edward, the father, was the absence. Not out of malice, but out of habit. He drifted around conflict the way fog moves around trees, present but never solid. He was gentle, yes, but gently detached. His avoidance became its own kind of harm, because silence can be as damaging as a sharp word when someone needs protection and gets neutrality instead. He loved his family, but in a passive, distant way, an affection that didn't shield, didn't intervene, didn't disrupt. When tensions rose, Edward simply stepped aside, leaving Valentina to absorb the impact. His inaction allowed the imbalance to flourish, and then there was Serena, the radiant center of the household orbit. She walked into every room as if the world owed her brightness. People shifted to make space for her, compliments floated her way effortlessly. It wasn't her fault she was favored. Favoritism rarely feels like manipulation to the one receiving it. Serena's beauty, charm, and ease became the family's pride. Mistakes were brushed aside as youth, flaws reframed as quirks. If she forgot, someone else remembered. If she broke something, someone else fixed it. If she overspent, someone else, usually Valentina, covered the cost. Serena didn't need to demand anything. The family delivered before she even articulated the need. Placed beside them, Valentina became the quiet counterweight. Not loud, not flashy, not desperately seeking attention, but critically essential. Where Serena dazzled, Valentina steadied. Where Edward withdrew, she stepped in. Where Marissa orchestrated, she executed. It wasn't spoken aloud, but everyone felt it. The system worked because Valentina worked. And systems rarely thank their foundation, they simply rely on it. This contrast between the four of them created an emotional imbalance so seamless that no one questioned it. Serena basked in warmth while Valentina was expected to endure the cold. Marissa curated appearances while Valentina maintained them. Edward floated through the aftermath while she repaired what he didn't acknowledge. Each person's personality wasn't just a trait, it was a role, and those roles formed an ecosystem that demanded Valentina hold more weight than was ever fair. The family dynamics weren't chaotic. They were structured, polished, practiced, and that was exactly what made the imbalance so invisible and so dangerous. When Serena announced her engagement, the house erupted into a kind of celebratory frenzy, champagne flutes, photo-perfect smiles, and an almost theatrical excitement that felt rehearsed more than heartfelt. Yet beneath the clinking glasses and congratulatory embraces, one truth settled into place as quietly and predictably as dust. Valentina would handle everything. No one said it directly. No one had to. Her mother's eyes slid to her the moment the word wedding was mentioned, not in a way that asked, but in a way that assumed. Serena squealed, hugged everyone in sight, posted the news online, and within minutes was talking about color palettes and floral arches she'd seen on influencer feeds. Damon, her fiancé, nodded along with a half-distracted smile, clearly aware his future in-laws had everything under control. Or rather, Valentina did. The planning started slowly at first, just a few emails, a couple calls, a spreadsheet to keep things organized. But like everything in Valentina's life, tasks multiplied. A simple outline turned into a full-blown project plan. Vendor research expanded into vendor negotiations. Payment logs became financial forecasts. What Serena wanted, Valentina built. What Marissa envisioned, Valentina refined. What everyone needed, Valentina delivered before they even finished the sentence. Every decision somehow ended up on her shoulders. The venue contract, the lighting crew schedules, the catering deposits, the backup rental options, the weather contingency plan. Even Serena's dress fitting was booked by Valentina, not because Serena was incapable, but because it was easier for everyone if she handled it. And easier was always code for Valentina will do it. Her role evolved with frightening efficiency. At first, she thought she was helping. Then she realized she was managing. Soon enough, she was running the entire operation. Not as a sister or a daughter, but as unpaid labor, an invisible wedding coordinator whose emotional investment was taken entirely for granted. Marissa's praise came only when guests were around. She'd beam proudly and say, "Valentina has everything handled," as if offering a compliment instead of a confession. Serena's gratitude was even thinner. She tossed out vague approvals like, "That works," or "Make it happen," without ever acknowledging the hours behind those words. The more Valentina did, the more she was expected to do. And the more she delivered, the less anyone remembered she was delivering at all. That's the dangerous truth about competence. It becomes invisible. Valentina paid deposits without hesitation, smoothing costs into her own budget because delays caused stress for her mother, and stress caused tension in the house, and tension, well, she had always been responsible for preventing that. Her savings dwindled quietly, transformed into floral arrangements and designer decor Serena had chosen without ever asking about the price. Yet no one looked at her with gratitude. They looked at her with expectation, the kind that grows unchecked when someone is reliable to their own detriment. By the time the wedding week expanded into a lavish multi-event spectacle to impress the future in-laws, Valentina realized something unsettling. She wasn't planning a celebration. She was funding it, sustaining it, carrying it alone. What began as support had morphed into service. What began as involvement had morphed into obligation. What began as love had morphed into labor. And no one, not Serena, not Marissa, not Edward, seemed capable of seeing the difference. In a family where appearances carried more weight than affection, and where responsibility was handed to Valentina like an inherited burden, her grandmother was the only person who seemed to see beyond the surface. Not just see, understand. She was the quiet heartbeat of every moment Valentina survived, the one presence in her life that didn't demand anything, didn't take anything, didn't expect anything except honesty. Her grandmother's small house, tucked behind a garden of roses and marigolds, felt like a sanctuary. The kind of place where time didn't rush, where conversations weren't competitions, and where silence didn't feel like punishment. Whenever the chaos of wedding planning threatened to swallow Valentina whole, she found herself drifting there, sometimes with an excuse, sometimes without one. The garden was always her grandmother's favorite place. She tended to her roses the way some people tend to their children, carefully, consistently, with patience and a quiet belief that everything grows better in gentleness. Valentina would sit on the old wooden bench, watching her grandmother trim the petals with deliberate motions, each snip a soft punctuation mark in the air. "You're carrying too much again," her grandmother would say without looking up. Valentina never understood how she noticed everything. The tension in her shoulders, the fatigue beneath her voice, the heaviness she tried to hide behind confidence. Maybe it was age or wisdom or simply love that wasn't transactional, love that didn't measure worth by output. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting planning meeting where Serena dismissed all her suggestions and Marissa scrutinized every choice, Valentina found herself in that garden again. She sank onto the bench, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. Her grandmother didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Instead, she said a line that would echo in Valentina's mind long after. "Strength isn't only in what you carry, sweetheart. It's also in what you refuse to pick up." The words landed like a revelation wrapped in softness. They weren't loud or forceful. They didn't scold. They simply illuminated a truth Valentina had never been encouraged to see, that selflessness could become self-erasure if not protected by boundaries. Her grandmother was the first person to teach her that love and duty were not the same thing. That loyalty shouldn't cost identity. That being reliable shouldn't mean being used. And every time Valentina tried to minimize her exhaustion or excuse her family's entitlement, her grandmother would look at her with those steady, knowing eyes and say, "You deserve the same care you give." When Valentina confessed the plan her mother suggested, using the grandmother's emergency savings to upgrade the wedding, her grandmother didn't gasp or lash out. She simply grew very still, as though absorbing the disappointment of something she had long suspected. "They've forgotten what family means," she whispered. "But you haven't." In those moments, her grandmother wasn't just a confidant, she was a compass. A grounding truth. A reminder that love shouldn't feel like debt. She represented a kind of emotional honesty Valentina had never received from anyone else, and it was her grandmother's unwavering presence, her quiet strength, her gentle wisdom, that gave Valentina the courage to eventually say the hardest word she had ever spoken to her family. No, her grandmother didn't just support her, she saved her, not by stepping in, but by showing her how to step out. There are moments in life when something cruel happens so casually that you immediately recognized it. Wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It wasn't someone not thinking. It was intentional. Quietly intentional. Deliberately effortless. For Valentina, that moment came not from words spoken to her face, but from one tiny motion of Serena's thumb. The uninvitation text from her mother was already a blow, a clean incision disguised as politeness. But it was Serena's response, the little floating heart that appeared beneath the message, that delivered the truth in a way no sentence could. A digital nod. A silent agreement, not even a pause. Not hesitation. Not concern. Just instinctive endorsement, as if uninviting her sister was as unremarkable as confirming a lunch plan. Valentina stared at the screen, and something inside her shifted. Not shattered. Shattering implies chaos, noise, emotional debris. No, this was cleaner, more controlled. Like a puzzle piece quietly clicking into place, revealing the image she'd been refusing to look at for years. It wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't thoughtless. It was a plan. Months of small slights suddenly aligned. Serena dismissing her suggestions, her mother scrutinizing everything she did, family decisions being made without her input, her father stepping aside as if stepping up required too much effort. Each moment she'd brushed off as stress or oversight now took on new meaning. They hadn't been drifting away from her. They had been removing her, piece by piece, decision by decision, expectation by expectation, and the wedding. This event she had single-handedly constructed, funded, and organized had become the perfect stage for her exclusion. They had used her work, used her money, used her competence, used her reliability, her silence, her obedience. And when she was no longer needed, they pushed her out of the picture so seamlessly that they didn't anticipate any resistance. What stung wasn't the betrayal itself, it was how easily they assumed she would comply. As if her loyalty was so unconditional, her boundaries so non-existent, they could erase her with a text message and expect her to stay quiet. Serena's was more than agreement. It was confirmation that the family had discussed this without her, that they had strategized around her absence, like one plans seating arrangements or color themes, that her presence was so inconvenient, her existence so unimportant, that excluding her felt natural, logical, even. Valentina felt the clarity land with painful precision. This wasn't about drama. This wasn't about the wedding. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This was about hierarchy, about convenience, about the ease of using someone who never said no. And for the first time in her life, Valentina didn't swallow the hurt or rationalize it or tell herself they didn't mean it. She sat with it, saw it, let the truth form a clean, steady line through her thoughts. They didn't forget her. They planned without her, not because she didn't matter, but because she mattered only when she was useful. The moment Serena tapped that heart, Valentina finally understood. She had been written out of a chapter she helped build, and that realization was not devastating. It was clarifying. A clarity sharp enough to change everything that followed. Turning points don't always arrive with rage or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes they come in a moment so calm, so strangely steady, that it feels like someone else is moving your hands for you, someone wiser, older, finally awake. That was the moment Valentina felt when she sat in her apartment, her laptop glowing on the table, the uninvitation text still fresh on her screen like a bruise that hadn't yet turned purple. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. In fact, she felt an unfamiliar stillness spreading through her body, the kind that only appears when denial finally cracks open and truth pours in. Her family had removed her from the wedding with the same casual energy they used to add items to her to-do list. Not out of malice, but out of entitlement. They believed she would continue paying, continue planning, continue holding them up, even while they pushed her out of the frame. It was almost laughable how certain they were of her obedience. Valentina opened her messages and typed the 2 words that formed the first boundary she had ever set in her life. Great choice. But it was the second sentence, the one she added after a breath, after a decade of exhaustion, that shifted the ground beneath her feet. Then you'll be free of my payments, too. The moment she hit send, a kind of sacred silence filled the room. A silence that didn't feel empty, but powerful. She realized, all at once, that everything her family had built for this wedding, the venue, the decor, the food, the timing, the vendors, rested not on Serena's dreams or Marissa's standards, but on her financial spine. They weren't in control, she was. And she had been all along. She turned back to her laptop. Not with anger, but with precision. With purpose. With the clarity of someone who finally recognizes the leverage she has been handing out for free. One by one, she opened each contract: catering, venue, lighting, rentals, photography, decor. Her name sat at the top of every agreement, every invoice, every email chain. Not Serena's. Not her mother's. Hers. The realization wasn't empowering in a triumphant way, it was sobering. It was shocking how much power she possessed and how little she had ever used it to protect herself. She drafted an email to the first vendor. "We will not be moving forward. Please cancel all pending invoices. Do not process additional payments." It was short, professional, unemotional, and it cracked the foundation of the entire wedding. She repeated the process with every vendor, executing each cancellation like a surgeon. Clean, precise, no wasted motion. She didn't mention family conflict. She didn't justify her decision. She didn't apologize. For once, she didn't feel the need to soften her boundaries for the comfort of others. As she clicked send on the final email, she leaned back and felt something settle inside her, a weight lifted, a space carved out. Not revenge. Not vindication. Something quieter, deeper, alignment. She had finally acted in a way that matched the truth she had been carrying silently for years. She wasn't their safety net anymore. She wasn't their fixer. She wasn't their funding. For the first time, Valentina stepped out of the role they assigned her and stepped into the power she always had. The morning felt different, almost sacred. The city outside Valentina's window seemed quieter than usual, as if holding its breath in anticipation. The sunlight slipped across her apartment floor in thin, golden streams, and she realized she hadn't felt this calm, this in control, in years. Today was the day. The day she would no longer be invisible to those who had long taken her presence and labor for granted. Her grandmother's hand, warm and reassuring, rested on hers, a steadying anchor, grounding her resolve. By the time they arrived at the airport, Valentina's nerves were nothing more than a distant hum. Every step toward the terminal was deliberate, measured, like walking across a line she had drawn for herself. Her grandmother walked beside her, small but unshakable, radiating a quiet authority that reminded Valentina who she had been all along, a witness to honesty, a guardian of truth. Through the sliding doors, passengers began to pour out of the arrivals gate. Among the crowd, Marissa led the way, her posture stiff, her smile practiced but fragile. Serena followed, dragging a suitcase that seemed far too heavy for someone so accustomed to ease. Damon trailed behind, phone in hand, absorbed, unaware that the gravity of this moment would redefine their family dynamic forever. For a moment, the old instinct to smooth things over flared within Valentina. She imagined smiling, apologizing, explaining, being small again to keep the peace. But that version of herself belonged to another life, one erased the second she accepted her clarity. Her reflection in the airport windows caught her eye, calm, composed, no longer the invisible laborer. Marissa noticed them first, confusion flickering across her face before it hardened into irritation. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp, defensive. Valentina's reply was steady, unhesitating. "You didn't need to pick us up. We already have a ride. We're here to hold you accountable." Serena rolled her eyes, a gesture that once would have triggered 1,000 explanations from Valentina. This time, she didn't flinch. "Then what?" Serena asked, voice dripping with feigned impatience. Valentina's grandmother answered with quiet authority. "You're here to apologize for attempting to exploit our family and to acknowledge that you've relied on Valentina for years without gratitude." The crowd began to notice. Travelers slowed, murmurs floated through the air. The tension tightened, but Valentina's resolve only deepened. Mason, their attorney, stepped forward, calm and professional, holding folders of meticulously compiled documentation, contracts, invoices, messages. Each page confirmed what had been invisible to everyone except Valentina and her grandmother. Marissa's composure cracked first, disbelief transforming into fear as she realized the tangible evidence of their entitlement and manipulation was now in public hands. Serena's arrogance faltered as she clutched the folder, the weight of accountability finally pressing down on her. Damon, usually the observer, shifted uncomfortably, silent for once, unable to provide the soothing commentary that had always deflected blame. Valentina, standing shoulder to shoulder with her grandmother, felt a profound shift inside her. This was no longer a confrontation born of anger, it was a recalibration of power. The years of labor, of invisibility, of exploitation had culminated in a single, undeniable truth: she was no longer expendable. She had reclaimed her agency, her finances, her voice. For the first time, the family had no leverage over her, and in that moment, as her mother, sister, and stepfather faced the consequences of their choices, Valentina felt the quiet thrill of liberation. Not vengeance, not vindication, freedom. The storm of confrontation had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt both strange and sacred. Valentina sat in her grandmother's living room, the air heavy with the aftermath of accountability, but free from the familiar chaos of guilt and expectation. For the first time in years, she felt the subtle but profound weight of alignment. The difference between carrying everyone else's burdens and carrying her own had never been clearer. The family messages trickled in over the following days, angry, embarrassed, pleading, and occasionally silent. She didn't respond. Not because she was cruel, but because there was nothing left to negotiate. The power they once wielded over her through obligation, guilt, or financial dependence was gone. She had reclaimed it, and she intended to keep it firmly in place. The legal notices Mason filed progressed methodically. Vendors confirmed cancellations. Deposits were returned or frozen. Every line of financial responsibility she had shouldered for others now existed solely as a record of what she had contributed, no longer a lever for exploitation. Watching the dominoes fall, she realized that true enforcement of boundaries was neither loud nor vengeful. It was calm, precise, and resolute. It required no spectacle, no dramatic confrontation, just clarity and persistence. Her grandmother, ever the quiet observer, sat beside her often in these days. They returned to the garden together, where roses bloomed as they had for decades, indifferent to human quarrels, but attentive to care. "You saved both of us," her grandmother whispered one afternoon, her voice carrying pride without expectation. But Valentina shook her head gently. She had not saved them. She had saved herself, and in doing so, created a safe space for her grandmother as well. Boundaries became a living, breathing part of her life. She didn't have to explain them constantly, justify them, or apologize for them. Calls, requests, and even casual inquiries from her family were filtered through a calm awareness. If it infringed on her values or her grandmother's security, it was not hers to absorb. Slowly, the emotional labor that had once defined her days began to lift, replaced by a sense of spaciousness she hadn't known existed. In this quiet aftermath, Valentina also began to cultivate purpose beyond avoidance and protection. She applied for a volunteer position at a local advocacy center, supporting older adults and vulnerable individuals, people like her grandmother, who deserved protection before anyone realized they needed it. She found fulfillment in proactive care rather than reactive sacrifice. The difference was subtle but profound. She was no longer acting out of duty to others at the expense of her own well-being. She was acting from alignment, from clarity, from a desire to make a meaningful impact. In the weeks that followed, messages from her family remained, sporadic and awkward, yet they never carried the same weight. There was no drama to manage, no crisis to absorb, no exploitation to counteract. Valentina had stepped fully out of the pattern she had been trapped in for decades. The freedom she felt wasn't loud or flamboyant, it was steady, anchored in truth, and reinforced by consistent, non-negotiable boundaries. For the first time, she understood that love and loyalty didn't require self-erasure. Protection didn't mean enabling. Support didn't mean disappearing. And in that clarity, in that quiet reclamation, Valentina discovered something far more powerful than revenge: freedom rooted in integrity. There is a quiet, radical power in understanding that love does not require erasure. Valentina discovered this truth not in textbooks or lectures, but in the slow, deliberate act of reclaiming her life. For years, she had believed that to love her family meant bending, giving, and disappearing. She had assumed that loyalty was measured by how much she could carry, how many crises she could absorb, how little she could ask of herself. But the unraveling of the wedding saga revealed a simple, transformative truth: love is not measured by sacrifice at the expense of self. Walking away from the role assigned to her did not mean abandoning her family. It did not mean she ceased to care or that she turned her back. What it meant was something far more profound. She refused to let their expectations define her worth, dictate her actions, or compromise her boundaries. She learned that boundaries are not walls, they are lifelines. They are statements of integrity, markers of clarity, and acts of self-respect that allow love to exist without self-erasure.in reclaiming control over finances, decisions, and her own time. Valentina experienced what it means to be aligned with her own truth. Every action she took after the confrontation at the airport, every vendor email she sent, every legal document she filed, was not motivated by revenge, but by the clarity of purpose. Her love for her grandmother, for herself, and for the life she wished to lead demanded this rigor. The freedom she discovered was not loud or performative, it was steady, unshakable, and rooted in the knowledge that she could protect those she cared for without sacrificing herself. The act of boundary setting became a rebirth. It allowed her to step out of the invisible labor imposed by entitlement and expectation. She no longer measured her value by how seamlessly she could fix problems for others. She learned that real strength lies not in carrying everything for everyone, but in discerning what is truly hers to carry. This rebirth did not erase her past, it reframed it. Every moment of overlooked effort, every unpaid emotional debt, every ignored boundary became the foundation for a new self, built with intention and clarity. Valentina's path forward extended beyond her own family. She channeled her energy into advocacy, helping older adults like her grandmother secure their financial and emotional security. She applied her skills and empathy in ways that did not demand self-erasure, demonstrating that love, care, and service can coexist with firm, principled boundaries. She discovered that protecting herself and others need not be mutually exclusive. The core message of her journey is simple, yet revolutionary. Love does not require disappearance, and boundaries do not betray affection. To live fully, authentically, and compassionately, one must honor the self first. The courage to say no, the strength to reclaim agency, and the wisdom to act with integrity create a life where love can flourish without cost to the one giving it. Valentina had stepped out of the shadows of obligation and into a life of alignment. She realized, finally, that freedom, clarity, and love are not separate, they are intertwined. By honoring herself, she had unlocked the capacity to love deeply and intentionally, without erasure, without compromise, and without regret. In this rebirth, she found not only her voice but her purpose and the quiet certainty that integrity, once chosen, becomes the foundation for everything worth having.